All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me this morning. We've got a small crowd on here, but that's okay because we're going to record this and post it on our grants webpage for anybody who I missed on this holiday week to catch it at a later date. This is the fiscal year 23 hazard fuel reduction grant webinar. Can I get a thumbs up or a comment in the chat noting that you can hear me okay? Great, thanks Nancy, appreciate it. For those of you that are joining us this morning, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and the organization that you're with in the chat this morning, that will help me to understand our audience. A couple other technical announcements. I've got everybody placed on mute. Hopefully that helps reduce some potential background noise. If you do have questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat box and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. The webinar, as I said, is going to be recorded and we're going to go ahead and post that to our grants webpage. It does take us a little bit to do that, so just have patience with us. If you do end up experiencing any technical difficulties, put it in the chat box, and it's just me this morning, so I will do my best to assist you along the way. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Corey Ivy. I'm a grant project coordinator here at the Idaho Department of Lands. I am out of the Coeur d'Alene staff office. My primary role here is to be a contact for all grant-related inquiries, and I mean all. We do administer a handful of grants here at the Department of Lands, but I truly have been provided the task of being kind of a subject matter expert on the different grants that are out in existence today, and I can tell you there are a whole lot of them that are coming down the pipeline. So I'll share with you a resource that'll help you keep in touch with some of the ones that we're going to be dabbling in here at the Department of Lands, and that access or that resource will be at the end of the presentation. I also do application development for those that are entering into grant programs with us at IDL. I work back and forth with cooperators to develop out applications, but I'm also available for project planning, development support, and kind of overarching how you get involved in the realm of fire mitigation through grant programs under federal opportunities administered by IDL, but then again, just overarching mitigation and access to grants. So that's my role here with IDL. My supervisor, Tyler Holfeltz, some of you may have met him before. He is the all-knowing on Community Wildfire Preparedness Plan, CWPP. He is an incredible resource. He is the program manager here at IDL for fire mitigation. He also can lend a hand as far as project planning and development support, and he truly can help you kind of narrow down the different projects that you may want to pursue and how you make sure that those are in your CWPPs, and we are going to talk about that a little bit on the front end of this presentation. And he is the administrator for all projects here at IDL. He is the overseer as far as the development of agreements, MOUs. He can help with budgets, pretty well anything and everything that has to do with grants here at IDL, he is involved with. And I cannot go without mentioning Joyce Jowdy. For those of you that have had a grant program with us or a grant agreement with us before, you will have worked with Joyce. She is our contracts analyst and agreements analyst, and she is who you will work with on the reimbursement basis, which we will also talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So that's our team of three. A lot of money, a lot of different grant programs, and just a team of three. So as always, we appreciate patience when it comes to working through these with all of you. Before we start getting into the weeds of the hazard fuel reduction grant program, there's a couple of things that I want to mention. Those of you who have been around with us for a while are probably wondering why this is just HFR. We had to do a shift in our grant programs this year, and we have in the last couple of years been kind of bobbing and weaving back and forth with some timeline shifts on the federal side as well. Many of the grant deadlines have been altered, and that has a lot to do with the onset of the Community Wildfire Defense Grant program that came out this last year. And so we at IDL have decided to shift our deadlines, shift our RFP process, our request for proposal process internally, in hopes of better aligning with those deadlines and better enabling our own internal capacity to handle the various grants, applications, and agreements that have came our way as we have, at least in this first year, taken on the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program, at least from technical assistance. And that definitely added a whole nother level of workload for all of us. So we'll kind of talk about the timeline here in a little bit. For those that might be waiting for the Western State Fire Managers Grant Program that's typically flown at the same time as HFR, that's going to be coming out in January. So just keep that in the back of your mind. One of the best ways to kind of stay in tune with what's going on in our grant world is through our grants webpage. If you have not seen this webpage, this is a great hub. Hopefully you saw it when you were making your way through all of the notifications that came out and getting signed up or getting this calendar, this webinar on your calendars. We do update this website all the time. It's gotten new facelifts over and over again since I started 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And CWDG added a whole nother facelift to it. So this picture is a screenshot of it on the left-hand side here. There's educational resources. This is where the webinar will be posted after we're done here. There are other links to some of the other related programs within IDL. So private landowners looking for how they can get involved, there's a landowner assistance page. And then the big umbrella of shared stewardship, if you've heard about that before, a big statewide effort, all hands, all lands approach, cross-boundary work. You can get access to those pages through this grant hub. We also have upcoming events and all of our newsletters that have gone out via Gov Delivery, and you can subscribe to that through here as well. So that's the link at the bottom of this page. But that's definitely a resource to keep nearby and to use often while you're working through our grant program and the whole process. So again, just kind of another preliminary component to this presentation before HFR. We always like to talk about project planning in the realm of grant proposal or grant application development, because in order to be successful in the grant realm, especially these competitive federal grants, you really should work through a process from start to finish, laying out your project, working with the right people, so on and so forth. So there's a couple of steps that we always encourage folks to take when they dive into this. The first one is collaboration. Planning meetings, can't stress the importance enough about having planning meetings and making sure that you've got the right people at the table. Oftentimes in the fire mitigation grant realm, you're looking at the same folks that may be involved in your community wildfire preparedness plan development. But also, if you're targeting specific communities, it's getting those landowners involved in that planning process too, to make sure that you've got buy-in for the project that you're proposing. The second piece of this is the research and review piece, and I kind of tweaked this a little bit from the last go around, and it's primarily because of CWPPs and how they've really became a backbone for getting access to grant funding. Make sure that when you're talking about developing a project, that you're referring back to the CWPP. Do you have a CWPP for your county? That's probably the #1 question to ask. And if you do, review it and make sure that the project you're wanting to implement or apply for funds for is in that CWPP. And then there's going to be a couple more slides that talk about that. The third one that has to do with planning your project is figuring out what your quantifiable, measurable outcomes are. HFR is definitely a little bit more relaxed as far as the 3 grant programs that we primarily administer here. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have well thought out, well-proposed, implementable actions as part of that project application, that project proposal. So determining the actions that you need in order to address the issues or reach a specific output that you're looking for. And whether that be signing landowner agreements, maybe you have a certain amount that you need to accomplish, maybe you want to accomplish a certain amount of acres, so on and so forth. Those are the quantifiable outputs that actually allow you to figure out if you're going to achieve what it is that you're hoping to get out of the project. So the quantifiable, measurable outcomes, they really truly are SMART objectives. Oftentimes we see this as part of goal setting, and it really is kind of along the same lines. So you're talking about implementable items or tasks or objectives as part of your project that are specific, you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. They're measurable. You know, you're looking for an X number of acres treated, X number of agreements accomplished, X number of home wildfire evaluations, accomplished, so on and so forth. Make sure they're actually achievable or attainable. You know, let's not shoot for the pie in the sky, that type of situation here. Are reportable. Sometimes we also interchange this with realistic. I think realistic and achievable can kind of go hand in hand here, but make sure that it's something that we can actually turn around and report out on our end when it comes back to reporting to the Forest Service, which is one of our requirements. And time-based. When do you want to have it done by? That's more along the lines of what we're looking for if you do get awarded and you start working through the agreements. But again, you want to make sure that you can accomplish what you're trying to in a certain amount of time as well. So always keep SMART objectives in the back of your mind when you start planning out these projects. So I mentioned earlier that I was going to tie back to CWPP, and this is the last little set of kind of preliminary information I want to provide before I jump into HFR. And there's a big reason for it. Recently, we've seen a lot of push from the federal side and the federal grants to ensure that we're tying back to our CWPPs locally. And in the case of the Community Wildfire Defense Grant, CWDG, without a CWPP and without a project listed in it, you are not eligible. And you may be wondering why I'm bringing up CWDG, because this is an HFR webinar. The reason why is because if you start working through the development of a project, or you start planning a project in your community that you're going to apply for HFR for, and you have to open up that CWPP, you may as well knock out the planning process and the plan development process all in one foul swoop, because it's going to set you up better moving forward. So every grant webinar that has to do with fire mitigation, I'm going to be bringing this up, so just be ready for it. Your CWPP needs to be current, and this does go with HFR as well. So if it's greater than 10 years old, it is likely considered expired. Make sure you're pulling the CWPPs, dusting them off, get them off the shelf, and open them up. The project that you're applying for needs to be explicitly identified in the CWPP. That is a requirement for HFR. So make sure that you've opened up that list of projects in the back of your plan, or wherever it's housed within your plan, and make sure that your project is in it. Neighboring plans are okay. This one came up a couple of times this year in other grant realms. And what this has to do with is we do have some areas in Idaho that are real close to a county border, or maybe they're split by a county border. And one county may have a project listed to cover a community, and another county CWPP may not. And there is a potential that you could piggyback off a neighboring county, especially if you're looking at kind of a joint project with another area. So just consider that if you've got communities that may overlap county lines, be chatting with your neighbors here is what we're trying to get at. Predefined, predetermined, like I said, needs to be listed in the CWPP and explicit in their listing description. We had a lot of questions and conversation this year about what exactly is explicit. Well, these next couple of slides are going to give you some examples of what we're looking for. Again, I need to stress here that I'm not asking that all of us go back as part of HFR and redo our CWPPs. I just want to make sure that we understand if we've got to add a project that we're doing it the right way to kind of lead us forward a little bit further. So a couple of yes, please, and avoid these examples. If we're talking about establishing fuel breaks, we don't want to just say we're going to establish fuel breaks along a highway in North Idaho. That's going to be considered too vague. Let's make sure that we're a little specific as far as where we're trying to accomplish things and what we're going to do. And what that does is it just helps to show the reviewers of these applications and the connection with the CWPP that we actually have thought about this in our planning process. So start looking at actual quantifiable metrics as far as like when you're trying to refer back to projects in your CWPP. Again, don't feel like you have to go redo them all right now, but just trying to get this in people's heads as we move forward, because the explicit requirement I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. Two more examples. Here's one. This one has to do with education. We don't want to just say we're going to educate populations in our community. We want to actually talk about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And this actually opens up doors for eligibility for various types of funding. So the last one here, defensible space stuff. Again, if we're talking about doing specific programs, or maybe you want to open things up further to buy equipment, another consideration is actually listing that. So again, don't feel like you have to update your CWPP right now unless your project is not included. If you have to add a project, please consider actually adding a little more detail to that project That way you're better off moving forward. So those are just a couple of things that I wanted to cover preliminarily, just because it really is tying in, and we're really seeing a lot of discussion and a lot of need to have our projects and our CWPPs be a little more defined. So if you've got questions about that, Tyre is, again, the CWPP know-all here for Idaho, and I've started to kind of get myself a little bit more educated in that realm, and both of us are happy to help in the regard to planning and your CWPP and your list of projects. So now we're going to actually talk HFR. Overview: the regional funds for the program come to us from the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, state and private forestry branch to be specific. We're always thankful to them for keeping these opportunities alive for us. The HFR grants are ranked and scored within our 2 regions. So Idaho is actually split. We've got Region 1 and Region 4, north-south of the Salmon River. That's the divide approximately. And the funding comes to us based on regional allocations. And so what that means is it could go up or down every single year. The process for an overview perspective, we solicit for proposals like we just did about, 2 weeks ago now, from all of our partners that we've got on our contact listing of delivery, and frankly, statewide. So if you know of anybody that may not be on that list, encourage them to get on it. And then in the end, IDL is actually the final applicant. So we're the ones applying to the Forest Service and then subgranting to cooperators to carry out these projects. Overall eligibility and funding. Eligible applicants, got state and local agencies, tribes, nonprofits, educational institutions. That's pretty straightforward for all grant programs at IDL. The biggest thing is that an entity has to have capacity to manage a project, and there's various ways that you can do that. And if you've got questions about options there, I would say let's talk on an individual basis, just because there's a lot of what ifs, or in this cases, that we could probably go over. So for sake of time, just shoot me a note if you've got questions about how to do this. Up to $240,000 can be awarded to a grantee, and then there's $60,000 for IDL to administer the grant. So the total maximum award is $300,000. Now, many folks in Region 1 are familiar with a lot smaller dollar figure than that. Up in the northern region, we do see most of our projects coming in from the $80,000 to $100,000 realm, and that's absolutely okay. In Region 4, it's a little bit more competitive, and so we do typically only put in for the max $300,000, which means $240,000 is what you'd be asking for. If you have questions, or if you are thinking you may not want to take on a full $240,000 grant in HFR, please don't just walk away from this. Please contact me, contact Tyre, have a conversation with us, and let's see if there's something that we can do to still work with you and get you a grant that is manageable for your area. Funding's provided on a reimbursement basis only. What this means is that these are not cash grants. We are not able to do just cash grants. And so what happens is the cooperator has to have the ability to go out, pay for services rendered, and then come back and request a reimbursement from IDL. In order to do that, you've got to have proof of payment to the vendor, the contractor, staff, et cetera. And then we review it, make sure that the costs are allowable and allocable before we give money back to the grantee. So that's what a reimbursement basis is. If you've got concerns, questions, if there's capacity issues for your jurisdiction, we are always trying to figure out how we can better enable different cooperators to come to the table in these grant programs. So please reach out to us and let's see what we can come up with. Okay, so the overall HFR grant process, the first thing on the docket is the proposal. So that's what we're here about right now. We did a request for proposals a couple weeks ago. Cooperators put together that proposal, and we'll go over it here at the end of this presentation. Every year we push out an RFP. Again, they've kind of shifted from previous years. So right now we're just asking for HFR. After the proposal comes to us, there's what's called the full application phase. And what that is IDL will review the proposals that come to us. Depending on how many we get for each region, it may warrant us to have an internal review and prioritization. And we also ask that our Idaho Lands Resource Coordinating Council come in, review them, and provide us some recommendations on which ones they think that we should actually push forward. So This really is dependent upon how many applications we get. Historically, we haven't gotten enough to warrant this. At least we haven't gotten more than we're able to submit. So again, this is kind of this review piece is really dependent on what we receive. And then the last bit is that we submit them to the different regions. So all of our applications or proposals that come to us from the northern region are going to go off via email for Region 1. That review process is amongst cooperators across states, so our neighboring states get in on that one as well. And then there's Region 4, and that one is a little bit more competitive, but again, it's just a regional review based off of, and then the funding is based off of allocations. So a little bit on the timeline real quick. This is an approximate timeline. We have seen some ups and downs as far as how things actually roll out, especially in this last year when CWDG kind of took over a lot of our time and the Forest Service's time. So just take this with a grain of salt, but we try and give you a small glimpse into kind of what to expect moving forward. The biggest date that I want to call out on here is that proposals for HFR are due January 13th this year. And that's actually going to bump up against our next RFP for the Western State Fire Managers and LSR. So we've got things kind of rolling out in sequence now, hoping that helps internally and externally to our cooperators to manage different proposal processes. Again, the ILRCC proposal review is noted as pending on here, and that's based off of the different applications or the number that we receive. And then February and March is when these go forward. Typically, Region 1 goes forward for review in February, and Region 4 goes forward for review in March. We'll see if that shifts again this year as well. Last bit of the timeline, and this is really approximate, because again, it's dependent upon allocations and the Forest Service and how things roll down from the Washington office. In the summertime, that's when we're typically notified of which projects are funded, and then we actually have to enter into an agreement development process with the Forest Service for those dollars, since we're the actual applicants. Normally, depending on how smooth that goes, we'll get the ability to notify applicants in the fall, and so that would be this coming fall of 2023. And as part of that notification process, that's when we actually say, hey, money's available. If you're interested in it, please fill out the following documents. And then that will enable us to enter into an agreement. So fall and winter is really paperwork heavy for those projects that are awarded as far as getting our agreements going. And once the agreements are in place, that's when we're able to actually start implementing work on the ground. Oftentimes we don't see folks do that until the following spring, but depending on your project and where you're at, sometimes winter work is an option. So that's the general timeline for this current RFP. So what is it that can we do with HFR? So these projects are limited in where they can take place. The land that is eligible is non-federal land. That's kind of broad. So basically you're talking about state lands, private lands, tribal lands. As long as we're not working on federal lands, we're good to go. Caveat is that you have to work within 1.5 miles of a federal project, and it must be a complementary project and a fire mitigation related project. So if you've got a neighboring Forest Service land that's replacing a building, that doesn't qualify. It's got to be a fire mitigation related project that's happening on the federal lands. And that project has to either be planned to happen within 3 years, currently in progress, or it has to have been completed within the last 3 years. So in a nutshell, what this means is you really should be in contact with your neighboring Forest Service partners, your neighboring federal partners, to kind of be implementing the work in almost a cross-boundary fashion, where you're working on your side of the fence and they're working on their side of the fence to create kind of a complementary fire mitigated landscape. So what are we doing with this money? Well, a lot of different mitigation and fuels reduction projects. So we're talking about fuel breaks, whether they're full breaks, shaded breaks, and green strips. Caveat, if you're doing green strips, you cannot pay for seating. Thinning projects is another one. So just your standard run-of-the-mill thinning like you see in this picture. Ingress, egress, and roadside mowing. And then defensible space is another one. The next bit is education and outreach. So with HFR, we're limited in what we can do in the education and outreach realm. What it boils down to is all education and outreach activities have to be participating landowner specific. So what that means is we can't do huge widespread meetings. We can't do mass events. We can't take this money and pay for huge, widespread mailers as far as like county-wide type things go. We're talking about the landowner's ground that you're touching and doing one-on-one education with those folks only. So if you've got questions about what you can and can't do there, again, shoot us a note, give us a call, and we'll kind of walk through your scenario and determine whether or not it would be eligible. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of things that you can and can't do with this money. Well, for those of you that are familiar with our programs, you know that we've got this other one called Western State Fire Manager. There's the bottom line objective for these programs is the same, but there are things you can do with one and you can't do with the other. And so what I wanted to do is kind of show you a comparison of the two programs as far as the main differences. So again, with HFR, you got to work within 1.5 miles of a complementary federal project. For Western State Fire Managers, there is no adjacency requirement. So if you've got a project in mind, but it's not within that 1.5 mile requirement, you may need to look to Western State Fire Managers instead. The project area education, you can only educate the specific landowners for HFR, but with Western State Fire Managers, you can do general education. So if education may be the one thing you're after, maybe Western State Fire Managers is a better option. Again, seeding is not an allowable activity for HFR, but it is for Western State Fire Managers, at least in the realm of mitigation seeding. So we're not talking about, purchasing conifer seeds, so on and so forth. And then HFR does not have a match requirement. And I haven't mentioned that until just now. We always encourage leverage, but it's not required. So, and match is your non-federal share. Basically it's a component where you as the applicant or cooperator would be bringing money to the table outside of the grant funds. Western State Fire Managers does have a match requirement. So for those that have a harder time with the match, they often will go to HFR, but if you can manage to come up with the 10% minimum match for Western State Fire Managers, that may open the door for the other allowable activities. So it's kind of up to you on which route you choose to go. Again, Western State Fire Managers is going to be rolling out in January after the HFR closes. So if that's a project, or if that's a program that you might be leaning towards more than HFR, just watch for the email notification in your email inbox for when that opens. Okay, so the last little bit here is the actual project proposal packets. In these packets, we've got a couple of different forms. The first one is an acknowledgement form. Looks a little different than the last go around. Overall information is the same. However, it is extremely important that all cooperators, all applicants review this information. This is an awareness form. You fill out the information at the top. You read through, acknowledging that you understand that these are the things that are going to come down the pipe as part of this grant program, and it likely is part of the agreement in the future, depending on your type of project. And then after you read all of it, you get down to the bottom, you print your name and you sign. You'll see here, this one has a digital signature. If you can digitally sign, fantastic. That's what we're looking for here. The second piece is a grant budget development guidelines and restrictions form. You actually will get this if you're awarded at a later date as well, but it's really handy to kind of try and determine what types of things you're looking to pay for and what buckets they will fit under as far as the budget table goes. And we'll look at that budget table here in a second. So this is a good form to keep handy and to kind of refer to. The last bit is the actual proposal itself. So we'll take a look at that here in the next couple of slides. This project packet, by the way, can be found on our grants website under the HFR tile. So if you remember back to the slide when it had a screenshot of our grants webpage, each of those tiles is a different program. So this one's actually under the HFR one. So this is the packet itself, and this is just the last couple of slides. So on here, this top box of program information, this is the guidance. Again, HFR is much more relaxed in comparison to the rest of our programs. So this is all of the required information, or this is, I guess, the requirements for the program, the cans and can'ts. So read through it. It's really brief. If you've got questions after you read it, we're always available to answer questions and help kind of clarify some points. So this bottom top box here, applicant information, this is your actual entity and the contact person for the applicant. The box after that, the community at risk information, this is the name of your project, the community you're working in, or unincorporated area if they don't have an official community name, your county, your congressional district, and then the actual latitude and longitude GPS coordinates for where your project's going to take place. And that's important so I can pull it up on the map and kind of get an idea of where you're at. And it helps us to verify the adjacency requirement. This next one has the budget table at the top, and then it gets into the project summary and timeline piece. The budget table, you'll see that there's some light blue shaded boxes and some white boxes. If it's white, you can't change it. If it's light blue, that's where you can put information in. The one that's light blue under grant share requested, that's in line with contractual. So our subgrants are considered contractual for us. So if we are subgranting to you as a county, the amount of money that you're requesting in total is going to go under contractual. So you're not going to be breaking down into different budget categories just yet. That doesn't happen until the actual agreement stage if it's awarded. So again, if you're seeking $240,000 for your subgrant, then that's the dollar figure that's going to go in that contractual box. The other light blue shaded boxes that are under leverage funds, this is where you're going to put any leverage funding that you may be bringing to the table. Again, it's not required, but it is highly encouraged, especially if we get a handful of different applications and we start kind of picking and choosing which ones we need to prioritize. So if you can come to the table with leverage, great, not required. And these boxes will auto populate or auto total. So don't worry about filling in the bottom row or that far right column. If you've got questions about this budget table, again, shoot me a note and I'll kind of walk you through it. Those set dollar figures in the grant share amount, that 60,000, that's what I had referred to about for IDL's administration. We do have a lot that we have to take care of on our end, processing reimbursements, reporting to the Forest Service, so on and so forth. So those dollar figures are set and stone on our end. Down to the project summary, a couple of different boxes here. We do need to know the name of the Forest Service project that you're going to be working up against and who that contact person is in case you've got questions for them. You're going to need to mark the duration of the project. You'll see here that it says 1 or 2 years. Mark 2 years. If it only takes you 1, that's absolutely fine. But we do want to extend this out. And in the end, the maximum amount of time is the best thing for us to put in the agreement. We need to know the amount of acres that you're going to be treating and about what the cost per acre is going to be. This can change, and we understand that it's changing pretty rapidly and the costs are fluctuating right now, but we do need an estimated cost per acre. And then how many communities are you going to be directly affecting with this project? I think that it's important to understand that these are approximate values. We're not going to be necessarily counting communities, but it does give us an idea of the impact that you're going to achieve with it. The state and private planning box, this has to do, frankly, I think this is actually an outdated box, but if you can populate it to the best of your abilities, please do. If you're not entirely sure what to do with it, give Tyra and I a call, and we need to determine internally if this is one that's going to be carried forward or if we can just leave it blank. The number of residents affected, again, an approximate value. Pull up a Google map, count rooftops, and call it a day. This, again, just helps us to understand the impact of the project. The timeline, it should be how you lay out to us what you plan on accomplishing within the total time frame of your project. Include acres treated, include landowner agreements, include your contracting processes. Anything that you're going to be paying for with the grant dollars should be outlined here. The CWPP boxes at the bottom, these are extremely important because if we mark no, there is not a CWPP, you are likely ineligible. So again, go back, check your CWPP, make sure it's not expired, make sure that the project is listed, and then this is where you're going to annotate all that information. and then provide us a link or where we can obtain a copy of this plan if we need to go and pull it, which we'll need a copy of the actual page later in the agreement process. Okay, the project area description. This is when we're looking for things about where the project's going to take place. What kind of vegetation are we talking about? Maybe there's some fire history you can explain to us. Keep it simple, but that's legitimately what goes here. The scope of work. This is when we were talking about those measurable outputs. We don't need month, date, year of when you're going to be accomplishing things, but it would be helpful for us to understand that there's a thought process behind whether or not the project's going to be achievable. And so when you start laying out what you're planning on doing, think about how much you might be able to achieve within the set time frame, but how you're going to do it. Maybe it's actually really important for you to consider the actual prescription that you're going to be using as far as how you're going to get the work done on the ground and what it's going to look like in the end. And then other budgetary information. Maybe you're going to contract out pieces of it. How much do you plan on contracting out? Those types of things. If you are looking for examples of how to fill this out, let me know and I can send you some examples. That's sometimes the easiest way to do this. Last bit here, as far as the application or the proposal goes, the interagency collaboration. This is when you get to talk about your grandiose planning process. How many folks, what different entities, what different organizations are all coming to the table to make this happen? And then what they're doing or how they are collaborating in this project. Maybe you've got some committees or some councils that are involved. Maybe you've got fire departments involved. Those types of things. Landowners is an important one to put in here because if you're working on private land, we like to see how the landowners are going to be engaged and involved in this process, what their buy-in is. So those are the types of things that we're looking for here. Maintenance and sustainability. How is this project going to be maintained moving forward? Is it outlined in landowner agreements? How is the jurisdiction going to keep an eye on it? Is there any dedicated dollars from a jurisdiction if you're talking about easements and doing maybe some fuel breaks along easements, those types of things? And is there an anticipated environmental factor that's going to weigh in as far as how often you may have to consider treating or maintaining or retreating this project? And keep in mind that we can't fund maintenance with these dollars. So those are the types of things that we're looking for. And then as well as educating your landowners. So if you're going to be doing some work on private landowner pieces, how are they going to understand and know how to maintain the work? So all about maintaining and making the implementation of this project sustainable in the future. All right, folks, that is all I've got for the presentation. And I've got some of those key links here on the page. Again, proposals are due back to us by January 13th. And I've got our program contacts on here, Tyre and I, since we're the ones that are on the front end of this proposal application process. So our emails, phone numbers are all listed here. And with that, I am going to pause the sharing here and open up the chat box if there are any questions. Or if you've got a lengthy question or you want to just fire one off, there's not a whole lot of us on here, so you're welcome to raise your hand or turn on your camera and I can go ahead and call on you to just ask your question out loud. So I'll open it up. Okay. Not hearing any questions and not seeing anything in the chat right now. Again, we are always available to take phone calls and emails and answer some questions, especially if you've got kind of specific ones about a certain project that you're looking at. So if there aren't any questions, I will give you back, about 15 minutes of your day, 20 minutes of your day. I appreciate you joining me this morning, and we will get this webinar recording wrapped up and get it posted to our website as soon as we possibly can, probably after the holiday. With that, I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you again, and hopefully we'll see a proposal from you in the next handful of weeks. Take care.